Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Jennifer Stewart. I'm the Director of Student Engagement at Webster, where I have the honor of working with our next presenters as the advisor to the Student Government Association, also known as SGA. We'll begin the session, My Space is Your Space, led by Sarah Hill and Jessica Battle, SGA President and former SGA Vice President. They'll talk about their experience founding and executing the Youth and Leadership Conference, which is aimed at supporting students who are underrepresented in positions of leadership. They will speak about their passion for and experience with leveraging your personal power in advocating for others. Sarah and Jessica.
Right. Thank you so much for introducing us, Jen, and thank you all for being with us today during our session. I am, as Jen said, Sarah Hill, the current Student Government Association president, fortunate enough to be serving in my second term. I hail from rural Missouri, which is known for not being super diverse, pretty homogenous space. But after graduating, I was able to go to Philadelphia to serve as a City Year AmeriCorps member in an under-resourced school in Philly with the most absolutely amazing students in the world. So it is a privilege and was a privilege to share my insight as a low income and first generation college student with those young people. But it was also a year of awareness as I understood how my experiences as a white woman shaped those interactions as well. I've also done a lot of voter engagement, education, voting rights work. And so access to the ballot box and education are very important to me. And so I think that you'll see throughout our presentation today how those things have shaped me, my experience, and what we're going to talk about today. Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much, Jen, for the introduction. My name is Jessica Battle. I am honored to be speaking with you guys today. I'm a recent alum of Webster University. I graduated this December with a degree in biological sciences, and I'm a non-traditional student, a transfer student. I transferred here from St. Louis Community College, and I had a great experience in college. I had a great experience there and a wonderful experience at Webster. But part of the reason that I started off at community college, literally just taking one class at a time, is because when I graduated from high school, I had no idea what I was doing. As a student of color, it was very, very hard for me to find resources and mentorship. And eventually I was able to find really strong mentoring networks here at Webster, especially. I've been part of the Webster Leads program, the Watts program for students in STEM, and participating in these programs and the access to mentorship and support that they provided me made a tremendous difference in my college experience and allowed me to give back to my campus and communities in ways that I never thought would be possible. As a student, I helped to start a free tutoring service for students in St. Louis City and North St. Louis County. I also tutor at St. Louis Community College, and I see every day that a lot of students that come from similar backgrounds as me don't have those resources and opportunities that have allowed me to do really cool things at Webster. So the Youth and Leadership Conference that we're going to talk to you today is our attempt to correct that and kind of a manifestation of using all of the tools that we've been given here at Webster.
Absolutely. So Jessica and I are here to talk about our experience, as you've heard, creating, planning, and executing the St. Louis Youth and Leadership Conference for high school sophomores and juniors, particularly those underrepresented in leadership, namely low-income students, BIPOC students, and others. And BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous people of color. We'll be using that term a bit throughout today. So one word you're going to hear from us a lot today is intentionality. And I actually got started on this word in relation to this presentation when Vincent, our Chief Diversity Officer, who you've hopefully heard from at some point throughout the conference, and I'm sure you have, asked us to put in a proposal. We hadn't thought about it. He said we'd love, for you to pitch your idea and come speak, and so we're really grateful for that. And a word that he used was intentional, and we really took that to heart because he's right. We did put a lot of intentional effort into this, and now that we've been able to reflect on it, we're excited to share. While we could have made this a really cutesy presentation about the great work that's happening, and in many ways that is what we did, you may not have realized that you signed up for something that is also a pretty good list of action items to learn how you can take these same practices that we learned and incorporate them into your personal and professional lives as well.
So we are going to take you through a journey of what we did to plan this conference. We're going to start with the background, what we did, why we did it, then take you through the planning steps, our execution, how everything went, and finally an evaluation of what we did well and what we think that we could improve on. So first, what we did and why. Big problem is representation. It's no secret that people in leadership across the country tend to be overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly white. 2009 and 2020, 93% of CEOs were male. 77% of our current Congress is white. In higher education, people of color as a group make up just 13% of executive positions. These numbers are not reflective of the diversity of our nation. They're not reflective of the diversity of Webster. And there's been a big push recently to diversify spaces, which is wonderful. But we do want to make a distinction. There's a difference between diversifying a space and diversifying positions of leadership. And when we thought of that, one of the things that came to mind was this graphic that's been going around Twitter. Universities or institutions will say we're committed to diversity, and then the diversity will be a couple BIPOC people in the lower level or mid tiers of the organization, and then everyone else at the top of the organization looks the same.
And this is not just a national problem, it is an everyone problem. I don't know a single institution that has figured it all out. So all of us as individuals, as organizations, as institutions have a long way to go. While Webster is a wonderful and diverse place, as I came in as a freshman, I started noticing that some of our most prestigious spaces on campus didn't always reflect that diversity, kind of like the tweet we just shared. I sat with this for a long time and asked, how do I tackle this issue? How do I make all of these spaces I am so privileged to be in, and some spaces that I've had to work or were hard to access for me even as a low income and first gen student, how do I make these spaces accessible to other students? And so with the help of Jessica and a lot of late night SGA office conversations, we'll talk about what that resulted in. So our approach was the St. Louis Youth and Leadership Conference. So we outlined a little bit for you before about what that looks like. And so what ended up coming together was a welcome and keynote, a student-led workshop, admissions and scholarships presentations, and sessions for students to connect with each other. So on January 23rd, this all came together virtually. Of course, we would have loved to be in person and meet the students, but overall, we were able to still execute this even in an era of a pandemic.
So we had three main objectives. The first was to encourage and provide community to students that are typically underrepresented or historically excluded in leadership. We targeted high school freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, so younger classmen, because we wanted to make sure the students had enough time to take the lessons they learned from our conference and then apply them in their high school leadership positions to set them up for college. This presented a little bit of a complication later on because we realized that a lot of the demographics we were trying to target, myself included, first generation college students, students of color, aren't necessarily encouraged to start thinking about college readiness as freshmen and sophomores in high school. Our second goal was to equip our participants with skills and knowledge that they could use to become more effective leaders. We also wanted to take this opportunity to showcase Webster's amazing student leaders. There are a ton of students on campus that were really excited to share what they knew with younger students and with the St. Louis community. So we recruited current Webster students, and all of our workshops and sessions, aside from the keynote, were given by current Webster student leaders. Our third and final goal was to empower students mentally and financially to not only attend college, but to seek higher positions of leadership in college. And like we said about the companies before in our little Twitter joke, Sarah and I have both noticed that in some of the most prestigious spaces in universities, those spaces are a lot more homogenous than in the greater student body. And we believe Webster has done a wonderful job of building a diverse, inclusive, supportive student body. This is one of the places where I felt most a part of the community, but there's always work to be done. As an example, I'm in the Webster Leads program. My Webster Leads cohort, I was the only Black student in that cohort. So we do still have some work to do.
So as Jessica was mentioning, the caveat to all of this empowerment program is that we're addressing a small piece of the problem, but service isn't long-term. It's not sustainable if it doesn't address the roots of the issue. There are lots of pieces to access that can't be solved by a conference, but can be solved by reframing processes and seeing diversity as the asset that it is. So the biggest piece of putting all of this together was working with partnerships. And I cannot stress enough how wonderful the staff, faculty, and administration here at Webster are in not just taking on this proposal that we brought to them, but in helping us and assisting us at every step of the way when we, as student leaders, recognize the issues that we want to tackle. So one of those first key and most important partnerships was with the Office of Undergraduate Admission. So huge shout out to Joanna Finch, our director there, for being an incredible support and doing all of the things that we couldn't have done on our own. Joanna also helped us work through admissions to commit a $1,000 recurring scholarship to every student who attended the conference who matriculates to Webster. So we can't wait to see that start happening and to be able to support these students financially as well. The next most important or equally as important partnership was Vincent Fluellen, our Chief Diversity Officer in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We call it the office, but really it's just Vincent. So I want to prop him up for all of the really great work he does. Again, two people, Jessica and I went to them and presented this and said, hey, this is what we want to do. And they said, all right, let's make it happen. And so we can't appreciate them enough for that. And then I was invited to speak at a student affairs meeting and just to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. So I came into this, Jessica and I came into this and said, what can we do as SGA? What can we do with our platforms? What can we do with our positions? Because we know that within any organization, there's only so much you can do, and that partnerships take time. They take everyone being on the same page. And so we came in with a kind of narrow mindset of this is what we know we can do as SGA, and we're just going to present it and we can do it ourselves. But if other people want to be a part of it, great. Everyone wanted to be a part of it. I didn't know how to take all of the support that people wanted to give. So one of those key pieces was the Office of First Year Experience and Undergraduate Persistence. Special shout out to Vanika Spencer, who said, what are we going to do after this? How do we follow up? How do we make sure these students are still going to remain successful after the conference? And because my thought going in was, what can I do with an SGA? I hadn't taken the time to dream bigger and visualize what more we could do for these students with partnerships and coalition building. So I am ever so grateful for all of the people at Webster that continue to support us in that way. And what that resulted in was post sessions after the conference. We just had our first in February, where students could hear from our last session was a scholarship and college essay writing panel with students who are super accomplished from all over the country, different schools. We want our students to come to Webster, but we also want them to do what's best for them and really just dream as high and far as they can. And then with the help of First Year Experience, as well as Career Planning and Development Center, our next two sessions will be advocacy as well as a resume workshop to continue building those skills. And then the final partnership I do want to mention is Global Marketing and Communications for publishing a story. We're going to talk a little bit later about some of the ways that I really appreciate the work that they did, but I also want to appreciate that they were able to highlight the work that we're doing and get the word out to an even broader audience. So our takeaways from the background section and all of the pre-work going into just building out the idea. First is think individual and institution. So this is for everyone, all of our attendees in the audience, whether you're a student, whether you're a business professional, wherever you are, think what can I do individually, but don't limit yourself. Ask what coalition building can do to help you strengthen your goals, because people will support you. If you have a strong vision and mission and values and you communicate those effectively, other people will want to support you. Maybe it's not everything that you want. In our case, it was more, but you can't know if you don't try. And then the second piece of what we want you to take away from the background is ask if you need empowerment or structural change. So ask how your processes and systems, and every single one of them, can change rather than just taking a surface level approach. Ideally, our application, reviews, etc., all of our processes, if they were reorganized with the value of diversity in the first place, we probably wouldn't need all of these cute external programs, though some maybe, but maybe not as many.
All right, so now we're going to get into how it all went down. And I just have to give out another shout out to the administration and staff. They were so supportive when we brought this idea to them. But once they approved it, it was on us to make sure that people actually showed up. And I got to give a shout out to Joanna in the Office of Undergrad Admissions, who used her contacts at high schools and with school counselors to help us get the word out. In terms of our outreach, we did try to focus on Title I schools. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, those are public schools with enough low-income students to qualify for supplemental government funding. We also made a push to get the word out to St. Louis City public schools. We did this by emailing teachers, but also emailing counselors, but also just by contacting teachers. We used our networks. We said, hey, can we talk about this in your classes? Can you tell your students about this? And we tried to contact students in rural counties of Missouri as well. In addition to that, so that was the school outreach. In addition to that, Sarah and I reached out to a lot of community programs. I contacted Upward Bound, Early College Academy, which is a program that allows students in high school to work toward an associate degree while they're still in high school. It was important for us to try to reach out to community organizations that didn't necessarily have a focus on education, because we also wanted to make sure that we weren't leaving out students who maybe more likely to get lost in the shuffle of the larger school system. So to do that, we contacted affinity groups, houses of worship, cultural organizations. We had some difficulty, especially initially, recruiting men of color. So I tried to reach out to affinity groups that would specifically target those populations, like Man Up STL, a network that provides peer-to-peer mentoring for men and boys of color in St. Louis. You'll find out how effective that was a little bit later on in our presentation. But in the end, overall, I am very happy that we took more of a community-focused approach. On the application later, we asked students to list their school counselors. And a couple of the students, and I wasn't exactly surprised to find this out, a couple of the students had no idea who their school counselors were. They were like, hey, I'm sorry, I don't know their name. And I understand that because I came from a school where the counselor probably could not pick me out of lineup just because we had so many students and resources are stretched thin. It's very easy for students to be overlooked, and we would have missed out on those applicants had we not done some community outreach. So for the application process, we wanted to use a really holistic approach. So when we designed the application, we thought about what we wanted the conference to look like, what we wanted the students to experience when we were there, how do we want to interact with them, and then we designed an application process that has prompts that basically asked, what does leadership mean to you? What their background, their past experience, their experience with adversity, any challenges they may have faced or will continue to face. We also wanted to know what they thought they would gain from the vision of our conference, obviously, and we wanted to find qualities like resilience, motivation.
Hey, Jessica, you're cutting in and out, so we're going to have you pause for just a second, and I'm going to let Sarah step in.
Yes.
If that's okay, sorry. You're just cutting in and out, and everybody's missing what you're saying, so we want to make sure they can hear you.
Well, sorry about that, Jessica. Jessica, if you want to try and turn your video off for a minute and give it a minute to catch up, maybe we'll see if that works. Yeah, so I will pick up with the application review and just, as Jessica said, keeping it holistic and making sure that we're looking at the entirety of an applicant, not just the GPA or any of the criteria that you initially are kind of looking for. Or would think of is leadership is not always the standard of leadership. So what we looked at when we were reviewing the applications was the applicant background. We looked into the type of schools, as Jessica mentioned, and then one of the funniest and most interesting pieces for me was when we were doing this, Jessica said, well, I think these these couple of applicants kind of from rural areas are underrepresented as well. And I had to laugh because, as I mentioned earlier, I am from rural America as well. So it was interesting to see Jessica advocate for my people when I hadn't even thought about it, which was, again, just a fun thing that we came across and had a good laugh about. And then when we were judging essays, we also took into account where the students were coming from, again, with that holistic process. So looking at, was there potentially a language barrier if they mentioned that they were a first or second generation immigrant? Did they have access to proofreaders? So we weren't looking for the prettiest application, the most eloquent. We were looking for you to say, I care about leadership. This is what it means to me. And the rest is just an asset, but it wasn't the core of necessarily what we were looking for. Ultimately, we had 46 people apply and we accepted 41 students. We could have done a whole lot more, but this is the group that we got, and we were excited to accept most of them. And then something that I did that Jessica mentioned was a really good piece of what we did was sent out an email to all of the applicants who we did not select. And I wrote a pretty long email that was pretty personal and said, I have been on the receiving end of many emails like this. It has nothing to do with your leadership capability. I offered an opportunity for them to reach out and get feedback if they were to want it. So this was an opportunity for us to say, we see your leadership, we see your talent, we hope that you'll come back and apply next year if you can. Instead of a generic email, we wanted it to be something that was personal and that would really hopefully encourage them to continue in their leadership journey rather than quit. And then something else that we did was calling to follow up with people when they were selected, because students in high school are not always checking their emails, and we wanted to make sure that the students did receive the good news. So that was a piece that was pretty necessary in making sure that we actually retained the students that we selected. And then I'm gonna move on to intentional outreach, because that's my slide and it'll work out anyways. And then Jessica, if you are figuring things out and want to step back in when you're ready, please do so. So the next piece of this was intentional outreach. So intentional outreach to student leaders on Webster's campus. We wanted student leaders here at Webster to share their insight, but even our student leaders don't always know that these spaces are for them. A couple of people that ended up presenting at the conference said, I hadn't really thought about participating, and I might not have if you didn't reach out to me. So doing that intentional outreach and saying, I want you to be a part of this, making intentional choices to say, you are going to add value to my space, and here's how. Coming with those reasons will really allow you to have the best space that you can possibly have. So I'm just going to give it just a minute, and I hope that Jessica will be able to rejoin us, because I want to make sure that we get to hear from her as well. Thank you all for your patience as we navigate this interesting digital world. All right, so she's joining us. We're going to continue without the PowerPoint, and you're just going to have to look at my face and see and visualize all of the things that we put on the PowerPoint, and it's going to be great. So moving forward past that intentional outreach, we had three takeaways for you from the planning section, things that we want everyone to apply to what you're doing, again, as an individual or in your institution. So the first is going to be to conduct intentional outreach. So again, that's to the high school students for us. That was to the Webster student leaders. We want you to really think about who you want in these spaces, not just who you want, but who you need, and how you can best reach out to them to make sure that that value is showing up in the space. The second piece is make it holistic. It's not always about who has the best GPA. It's not always about the standard that you maybe think for whatever space it is. And maybe it's not educational, again, whatever room you're in. Understand the value that each unique applicant brings, and understand that maybe a piece of that is resiliency or some adversity or skills that they bring that the rest of the people on your team don't have. And then the last takeaway is going to be to give feedback. So if you can, where you can, give an opportunity to grow. Make sure that you can give whoever it is that's applying or being a part of your space the opportunity to learn from it, even if in our case it wasn't selected, but this goes for everyone in any space at all. Give feedback where you can. So I'm going to pause for just a second so we can get the PowerPoint back up so you can see all of the lovely faces of our Webster student presenters, but hopefully it will not be too much longer as Jessica is relogging in. Alrighty, so as we move into execution, the biggest piece, again, were these Webster student leaders that were joining us to really make this program everything that it could possibly be. We could not have done it without them. So again, this is where that intentional outreach came from, and bringing these students to the table to share their insight, because it would not have been the same conference if it was me talking for hours throughout the day about my insights on leadership, because that's not what the students wanted to hear. While I shared at the very beginning and introduced folks to the conference, this was really about making a space for student leaders, particularly BIPOC student leaders and student leaders who come from similar backgrounds to the students that we invited to this conference, giving them the space to share all of the things that they've learned with students who look up to them as role models. So we had 19 student leaders, aside from Jessica and I, that poured so much energy and care into showing up for these students. Intentional outreach allowed us to bring in students who, again, our participants could relate to. And then these were a list of all of our breakout sessions. So we had several different workshops that were proposed by these student leaders. So we had a forum that you submitted, and then you said, this is, kind of what I want to do. And then we let them run with it, because again, we wanted this to be student centric and their voices to be centered. So you can read these list of different sessions that we had, lots of different things on communication and networking and how to find yourself at the table, Black Girl Edition. So lots of different, both identity-based as well as just skill and practical pieces. Then our Life After Student Leadership panel brought in alumni that Jessica and I both have had the privilege of working with in some capacity during our time at Webster, to be able to bring them back and say, not only did I learn at Webster, but here's how I'm applying it now. Jessica, if you're with us now, you want to take over now?
Sorry, I had some technical difficulties. Thank you for hanging in there. All right, so next, Sarah mentioned that we wanted to be really intentional. So we also thought about how we can translate that to our messaging, how we can make our messaging really intentional. So one of the things that we did when selecting our keynote speaker was think about who could give the message that we wanted to give. And we tried to talk to as many students as possible about what kind of leader they wanted to hear, what kind of representation they think that we needed. And one of the things that was interesting that we noticed is when we asked students who they would like to see at the conference, the answer was usually someone of color, a woman, a BIPOC speaker. When we asked faculty for recommendations, they usually gave us white speakers, which is fine. But for this particular conference, we really wanted to make sure that the speaker that we had could reflect some of the diversity of the students. And Sarah's going to talk to you a little bit about how we used intentional versus subliminal in our marketing.
Yeah, so the really important thing to note here is that everything is a message, everything is a choice. Sometimes it's subliminal and sometimes it's very overt. So we would kind of throw the keynote speaker, who was absolutely wonderful, Mayor Ella Jones, as a pretty overt message, having the speaker that everyone sees. But a couple of other pieces that were a little more subliminal were, one, marketing. So this conference was something born primarily out of an idea that I had, but it's not at all about me. It's about the immense talent that we have in St. Louis and at Webster. So in sharing the resources with GMC, Global Marketing and Communications, to get the story out there, I didn't want it to be centered around me because, again, it wasn't about me. So I got quotations from some of our workshop leaders, Jessica and another person who was leading a session. And I asked, how can I center a voice that isn't my own? So I want to also acknowledge that we want to market the great diversity that we have, but we also want to do so in responsible ways and ethical ways. And just going to throw in a side note reminder that we need to pay people for their image and work, particularly BIPOC folks. So just a side little tangent there, but this is really important to know. And so I do want to give special appreciation to Global Marketing and Communications, because when I sent them these quotations, they said, did you get these approved from these 2 students? And I said, yes, I did. I asked them specifically for it for this article, but that was a really great way that I feel like our team here at Webster said, we want to make sure that we're representing people in the most positive way that we can. And then the last piece of this with music, I just use as an example again of how every piece of anything that you're doing is a choice. So I wanted to choose some empowering music. And I really thought about the artists that I was bringing in. We only played music a couple of times, but I just want you all to think about what it would look like if we invite a diverse group of students to this program to tell them that they can be in all of the most prestigious spaces. And then all of our program's most prestigious, both subliminal and overt speakers, artists, etc., are all wealthy white people. Then we're sending the alternative message that we actually intended to send.
So for our takeaways for our execution, first is to make everything a conscious choice. Sometimes that means you may have to reach out to people outside of your circle. Sarah and I don't represent the wealth of diversity at Webster or in our community, so we had to ask other people for opinions on certain things. Second, know whose voice needs to be centered. In order to do that, you really have to understand not only your audience, but who's there and who's missing from the audience. And the last piece was to offer support. Sarah made a great comment about when you use people's faces and when you use their likeness, to not just profit off of them without offering support back. Sometimes that's in the form of payment. Sometimes that's just asking them, hey, how can I help you? What assistance do you need from me? So we tried to make sure to center that in everything we did with the execution of this conference. And we wanted to get as much data as we could after it so that we could really hone in on what we did well, what went wrong, what we could have done better. So we're going to present some data points to you. First is qualitative data. Our main gathering method for this was surveys. We wanted to know what impact we would have on these students in the future and if they felt like they were represented. So we asked questions like, how encouraged are you to continue in leadership after this conference? We wanted to know if they saw themselves represented, and not just represented, but represented positively in positions of leadership, both in the US, and whether they were represented positively at the conference. And then we asked for questions that were just general feedback questions like, do you, on a scale of 1 to 5, do you see yourself to be more likely to attend Webster after this? What kind of things did you learn? What were the best parts of the conference? What could have been better? So we got a lot of feedback. Almost every student, I think, who went to the conference filled out the survey. And so I wanted to just share some of the quotes that we got from students. A lot of people talked about the specific breakout sessions, which we thought were really cool because we made sure that they were all student run. So one student said it was so encouraging to hear the perspectives of student leaders with new ideas rather than an older person, no shade to older people, with more life experience, even though it is important to hear their perspectives on leadership as well. Another student commented that they loved that the panelists could relate to them so well. We got a lot of personal shout outs for the Webster students that gave presentations. Travis was one of those students that a lot of the high schoolers gave shout outs to, and he made sure to reach out to everyone on their Zoom call, offer support. He gave a talk on networking, and we had a couple small business owners, high school business owners in the audience who reached out to him, and he gave them great advice, and they soaked up everything that he had to tell them. A lot of people really enjoyed connecting with others in leadership, and said the conference helped them to get out of their comfort zone. And then again, just more comments on specific sessions and how students benefited from them. The qualitative data we collected did highlight some opportunities for improvement. First was in the social engagement piece. So one student mentioned that they would have liked more time to connect with other participants, especially to help them use the knowledge from the conference and put it in action. So one thing that we did with the student speakers, the Webster students, that we didn't do with the conference participants, and I wish that we had, is to use social media, social communication platforms better. We did a lot of advertising, a lot of Instagram, a lot of Snapchat, and those platforms are great for spreading the word, and they're great for kind of passive engagement, but they're not really that good for communication. So one thing we did with the student panelists is to make a GroupMe group. You could also do WhatsApp, but in this virtual space that we're in, and lots of problems come with it. I just had one, but one of the other problems is that it's really hard to build a sense of community. So in the future, when we do this, I'd like to have a place where the students can chat and just ask each other questions, give each other kudos during the events. We've been virtual for about a year now. And I found that just in my experience as a student, the classes that employed some kind of chat room, I enjoyed much more and felt more connected to than the ones where I could barely interact with the other students. Second piece was representation. One of the comments we got was, I do wish there was more representation of different sexualities and gender identities. And we highlighted this comment because the person that wrote this actually was represented. Their gender was represented in the conference. We asked if that was the case. But I thought it was really cool because the student saw that someone else that was unlike them wasn't represented. So that's the point of going to all these conferences, right? We wanna make sure to open ourselves up and take stock of not only that our needs are being met, but that people that have identities that differ from us are being met. As a Black student, I often go into a room and I look around and I think, am I the only Black person in this room? But it wasn't until more recently that I started to think, okay, how many international students are being represented? How many Asian students are being represented? Why is there a gap here? And what are the consequences of that gap on the student themselves and on our community as a whole? And then we mentioned this briefly already, but Sarah will go into it later. We didn't get great representation for men of color, and that's something that we need to work on if we do this in the future.
So now I get to do the numbers breakdown. So this first slide will show you the representation in terms of race and ethnicity. So we had about 69% of our attendees as identifying as BIPOC. Now I will say that we broke this down and said attendees. We are still working on the data of who actually showed up. I want to say it was around 36, 37 out of the 41 students. So there might be more disparities there that we're not showing you in this data. And I'm acknowledging that because I think that the ethical representation of data is very, very important. But here you can kind of see a breakdown of all of the students that we had by race and ethnicity. And then on the next slide, we will show you gender identity of attendees. It's definitely something where we can do some outreach both as the students who attend the conference, but also students at Webster's campus. And I think part of breaking that down is Jessica and I asking, who are our circles? Who are we reaching out to? And who are we missing in our own circles, but also at Webster and everything like that. And then the next piece is first gen. So we had 30% of our attendees were first generation college students. I would have liked to see a higher percentage of this, but it does make sense that these students aren't necessarily thinking about these types of conferences. So moving forward, we just want to continue to push the outreach to say, the conference purpose was to say you deserve to be in these spaces, but even saying you deserve to apply for these spaces is a challenge. And so really working on ways to improve that is something we'll look at going forward. And then this last piece does a couple of breakdowns from the questions that Jessica was talking about. We did have 41 high school attendees. 95% of Webster student presenters who presented at our conference identify as POC. I'm the 5%. I did the introductions. As I mentioned, this was an opportunity for me to step back and give space to other students. So all of our presenters at the conference, aside from myself, were BIPOC, but I didn't feel that saying 100% was an accurate reflection since I did set the tone and come in and do the introductions at the beginning. And then this piece, which I think is the most crucial and was the most important part of the conference, is 100% of students who said in some way they didn't see themselves reflected in leadership in the United States, said they did see themselves reflected in leadership in some way at our conference. That doesn't mean in every way. We talked about ways that we needed to improve, but this is a really big point for us to look at what we did and what we hope to do and see that students did see someone there at the conference, if only one person, that they said, I can connect to you. Not only can I connect to you, but I see where you're at and I want to be there too. I want to aspire to that position of leadership. And then 85% reported being more likely to attend Webster than before. So part of this in pitching it initially was definitely, you know, we want to show what Webster has to offer, and we hope that students will consider the ways that they can continue to develop their leadership, bring their grand vision for change to our university. So what we learned here was, one, as Jessica mentioned, we need to do some specific outreach to BIPOC men. We did not have, women showed up and we love to see it, but we really need to do some outreach to our young men of color, young BIPOC men, some more gender diversity. And then we didn't explicitly ask income, and there were reasons for that. Going forward, it's something that we definitely want to consider if there are ways to do that appropriately, because it would be nice to know if we really are drawing in low-income students or not. Yes, there are intersections of that in first-generation college students, but being more specific could be helpful. And then a bit more on data before we move into these takeaways. Find data, go collect data, and then use the data to inform. Now, this is kind of the real adult things. If you're in the business profession, the professional world, the business world, somewhere where you have the resources to do this and you're not 20 some odd year old to women in university and don't necessarily have the capabilities to do extensive data. If you have the capabilities, you need to do it. And if you hear nothing else from our presentation today, disaggregate data. Please, 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 please disaggregate data. It is a racial justice issue. It is a social justice issue. To give just a really brief kind of off-topic example, I'm writing a speech right now for the speech and debate team on BIPOC missing children, how they don't receive the same media and they don't receive the same Amber Alerts. The FBI classifies whites and Hispanic children in the same category. It's very convenient. Very convenient to cover up the disparities. So please, please, please disaggregate data. For us, one piece of where we thought that would look like, though usually it doesn't apply to necessarily white individuals, we had some Bosnian second generation immigrants and things of that nature that identified as white. So breaking that down could also help us make informed decisions in the future. And then finally, students did not come. So our data was reflective of who we accepted. All right, now moving into these evaluation takeaways. Joanna, if you could go back one slide. Thank you so much. With the takeaways, again, if you can in your organization or institution, collect data, use the data, and then disaggregate the data. You have the capacity. Don't make excuses. And then the last piece, this is for students and other people who maybe don't have that capacity. Just be aware of who is at the table with you. Understanding who's around you and who's not around you has to be a cognizant, conscious choice every day that you're making. And you don't necessarily have to have data to do that, but if you can, that's best.
All right, so as part of our conclusion, we want to bring up this idea. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. Of institutionality versus personal responsibility. And sometimes people are in two poles, in two different camps. We think that it's all on the institution to make change, and it's their job to make sure that we're defeating all of the inequities in our society. And some people are like, no, institutions do enough. It should be on the person. My personal behavior just by itself can fight racism or sexism or gender bias. And we really want to emphasize that it has to be a combination of both. Sarah and I, as people, tried to do everything that we could to make this conference successful and to make space for people who are underrepresented. But if the institution hadn't supported us, it really wouldn't have meant as much as it did. So it's going to take a combination of both institutional change and personal responsibility. And part of that is knowing how our social environment and our privilege affects how we interact with things, and knowing that everyone has different privileges. That doesn't mean that you haven't struggled. It just means that there are things to be aware of that you could change, and we should act on those more often.
So a couple of final takeaways from all of this. The first is that diversity, equity, and inclusion takes all of us. I'm going to use a really brief mock example of something that I don't think has happened in our student government, but happens at every institution, we have a ambassador for diversity and student inclusion, Brian Barley. You'll probably hear from him at some point throughout the conference. Wonderful individual. If I created this conference and then I said, okay, Brian, I had this really good idea. Now I'm going to give you all of the work to incorporate diversity and inclusion. That would not be a problem, or that would be a problem. That would not be okay. It's even worse when I see our institutions and people of leadership passing that work off to someone who isn't even in a position of diversity and inclusion, but because they're probably the one BIPOC person on the team, we think, oh, you can do the diversity and inclusion work and that will be enough. It's not. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are not positions or roles to be given to one person. They are skill sets that we need to make a conscious and intentional choice to practice every single day in every piece of work that we do. It takes all of us. That moves us into that second piece of making conscious choices. Making no choice is making a choice. If you just put on your playlist for music for whatever you're doing and it's all white people, you didn't make that choice intentionally, but it is a choice. So understanding to make cognizant choices, every component needs you to ask who's at the table, who's not, how do we get them there, and how do we make the space a welcoming space where they want to stay. That final piece is that empowerment was our first step, but it's not the last. We all must address systemic and structural procedural barriers that keep us from recognizing the value diverse young people bring to every space. So this last piece, I think we will not make you run through here, but we will kind of just run through it, is a quick way that every single one of you can practice this in your individual lives and not just for projects. So this is a diversity and equity and inclusion social media audit. So if you, we will post this to our own social media, Webster University SGA, after this, but what we want you to think about is ask yourself some of these questions and more. It's not all encompassing, to see what you're interacting with on a daily basis, particularly if you're a young person that uses social media often. Who's showing up on your feed? Who have you normalized? And then do this for individual and organizations versus businesses, because you have friends, you have your own network, and then you have a broader network of what you're looking at on social media. Make sure you're diversifying those feeds and make sure you're doing it in positive ways. So just because you have a person different from you on your screen doesn't mean that it's necessarily a positive representation of them. So that's something to look for. So I went through, I did a little checklist myself, and then I made this based on some things that I was thinking of, and Jessica had added her input as well. And I didn't answer all of them that well. This is something you will probably fail, because you have to make an intentional choice to go seek out ways to diversify your feed. So if you start looking for diversity in an area of your life and you can't find it, ask why that is. And the answer shouldn't be because the town doesn't exist. We've never had a female president in the US, but I hope you've noticed today that this country and this university are not lacking women who lead. If you follow photography accounts, if you follow accounts of whatever it is, you follow photography, follow photographers of different backgrounds, taking photos of people with different backgrounds. If you follow cute puppy video accounts, follow all the different cute puppy video accounts. Okay, that's a joke, but also probably you follow cute puppy video accounts. In all seriousness, we can apply this to the movies and plays that we watch, the books that we read, the businesses that we shop out, and every aspect of our lives. These efforts have to be intentional, because this doesn't happen on its own. Subliminal messages are everything. By diversifying what we take in on a daily basis, we normalize people who are different from us being in all of the same spaces. By making these conscious and intentional choices, my space becomes your space.
Thank you guys so much for having us today. I apologize for the technical difficulties. We have a couple minutes for questions and a few questions in the chat. So first one is, do you have a concern that those students who do not have access to technology or the skills necessary to use technology are either falling behind or not being able to participate in such a wonderful opportunity? I will take a first stab at that. Yes, probably. It was much harder to get people to participate when we were just sharing the information on socials and not able to have face-to-face contact with them. We did try to take steps to mitigate that. We tried to make sure the application was easily accessible in a document that you could do from your phone. We tried to make sure that everyone could join the Zoom conference, whether they had a nice space to be in or not. So we didn't actually require students to turn their cameras on. It was nice if they did and if we could see their faces, but we understand that not everyone's space is built for sharing. So it was okay if they didn't.
Yeah, I would say on the flip side of that as well, that we might have had different challenges if it was in person. So I think that, and we've been thinking about how we might approach that if we do it in person, but I think, yes, tech is always going to be an accessibility issue. And we tried our best with calls and follow up to see what we could do. But yeah, I think it's something to continue thinking about going forward. So I appreciate that question being raised.
I do think calling the students help and just letting them have a voice to the name and the email. Second question, how are you empowering other Webster student leaders to carry this forward once you've graduated?
I can start with that one. So the people I have in mind don't know it yet, that they're going to be taking over at some point. And I think I tend to do this frequently in student government. I say, hey, I don't know if you've thought about this, but you would be incredible. So I want you to be in this space and do this work if you want to do it. So I have tried to make different pieces of the process transparent to other student leaders to keep them involved. I think that we'll have some student government folks and other folks who have been a part of the conference that will want to stay involved. Even the students that Jessica and I knew on the February panel about scholarship writing, who were attending Princeton and Rhodes and all of these really great universities elsewhere, said, hey, I want to come back and help with this. If I can do something else, let me know. So we have the interest. And so now it's just kind of writing down and reflecting on all of the things that we can pass on. But I think that we definitely have the student leadership capacity of people who took part and want to remain taking part, that will be able to just share the knowledge for them to make it even better than we could have.
Yeah, I second all of that. We have time for one more question, so I'm going to ask this last one. It says, you guys built a strong model of teamwork by doing this. What aspects would you repeat? What would you do differently? For me, one of the things that I think we missed out on a little bit was the student engagement, peer-to-peer engagement between the high schoolers. So I would definitely want to emphasize that. That's a little bit easier to do in person than it is online, but dedicate some kind of resources or focus to that.
Yeah, I agree. And I hope that we've talked a bit about this as well. And you've caught some of those pieces throughout, but really finding ways to do even broader engagement, because we know that some students are ultimately still going to get missed, still not apply. That is something that I think now that we've done it once and we are going into it now versus when we came in and pitched the proposal initially, we have the time to say, where do we go to really reach out to these students? Who do we need to be talking to? And going from there. And then ultimately, I hope that one day it will be in person, because that's just a connection and an experience that you can't replace.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah and Jessica, for sharing your experiences this afternoon. I will just say that personally that I am always so proud of both of you and the work that you've done with Student Government Association. You make my job so much easier. So thank you again. We will begin the next session right away with a performance from Alex the Great. Thank you, everyone.